Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Skillshare, and it contains some major spoilers for Solo: A Star Wars Story. Solo is my favorite Star Wars movie that doesn't really need to exist. I'll dig into that statement more in a bit, but first I want to talk about Disney. Specifically, how they kind of did this movie a disservice. It's well publicized at this point that Solo was plagued by behind the scenes issues, and if you're watching this, I probably don't have to tell you about the firing of the original directors Lord and Miller. Maybe Disney made a good choice by giving the film to Ron Howard. I wasn't there, so I don't know, but there's no denying that it lowered people's expectations for the film. Then there was the hiring of an acting coach for star Alden Ehrenreich, something that literally happens all the time in the film industry. But because it happened when it did, it only added to the narrative that the movie was in big trouble. But I don't think it was really the bad press that resulted in Solo's lower than expected box office. 90% of the blame should be put squarely at the feet of Disney's scheduling. I've never been more confused by a summer blockbuster season than I have been this year. Infinity War opened April 27th, it predictably did great and took the top spot for the biggest opening ever. Deadpool 2 opened 2 weeks later. For some reason, Fox had moved the movie up from June 1st, and it resulted in a decent box office pull, but definitely lower than the first. Then there was Solo. Okay, so you have to remember that the average American only goes to the theater about 5 times per year, and many of them had already just seen Infinity War, Deadpool 2, or maybe even both. So opening another blockbuster right after that just seemed like it wasn't a great plan. Not to mention the fact that the highly divisive Last Jedi only came out 6 months ago. For a lot of people, I think the reaction to Solo was less, wow, a new Star Wars movie, and more, another one of these already? Disney positioned this movie terribly in my opinion, and mediocre reviews aside, I think Disney's scheduling needs to take the brunt of the blame. It's kind of crazy that $103 million domestically is now considered a disappointment, but in the ridiculous current state of the film industry, where studios opt to bet big on a few movies rather than giving smaller budgets to a lot of mid-tier movies, these things really do have to be huge, every single time. In my opinion, if they had just moved this back to like November or December, where the stiffest competition it would face is Mary Poppins and that sequel to a Harry Potter prequel that people weren't really that into, it probably would have done much better. It would have given people a little time to get excited about the franchise again. But it also worked out really well for Rogue One, which opened to a much stronger $155 million just a few years ago in December. But enough box office stuff, let's get to the movie itself. First, let me say that I liked Solo, plain and simple. I've seen this movie twice now and I really enjoyed myself both times. This side of the Star Wars universe has been my favorite since I was a kid. Smugglers, bounty hunters,
Will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy.
all that good stuff. I've always preferred it to the much more serious Jedi and Sith. And yeah, as many people online have pointed out, the movie does get a bit too winky with the audience. Like the scene where Han gets his last name is, not great. But other than that, I'm really gonna stick up for the way that this movie uses the Star Wars universe. Episode 7 was very obsessed with mimicking the look and feel of the original trilogy, to the point where The Force Awakens almost feels too indebted to it and afraid to do anything new. The Last Jedi took the Star Wars mythos very seriously as well, but in a different way. It deconstructed it. Now you can love the way it did that or absolutely hate it, but either way it's hard to deny that it's a movie fixated on the past. This may sound weird to say about Solo, a movie with far too many winks to past films in it, but it feels like it just takes a much looser approach to the Star Wars universe. Instead of being so invested in the lore of Star Wars, it just sets up a good old-fashioned space western and lets it play out. Now, does it have the beats that you'd expect a Solo movie to hit? Definitely, but I'd also argue that it never feels weighed down by them. Corellia, the Kessel Run, it all feels pretty fun and effortless. I especially liked the gambling scenes with Donald Donald Glover's Lando. Honestly, one of my biggest complaints about this movie is there just wasn't enough of him. His performance is interesting because in many ways it's a lot more over the top than Billy D. Williams, but in a very believable way. This younger Lando has just as much style, but doesn't have the actual life experience or clout to back it up. Instead of being the leader of Cloud City, you get the impression that Lando is actually in a really tough spot and kind of trying to bluff his way out of it. And that's a really fun take on the character to watch Glover play. I also really liked Woody Harrelson as Beckett. I feel like most coverage of the movie I've seen hasn't mentioned just how good him and Paul Bettany as Dryden are in this movie. Harrelson is interesting because he's playing the guy that Han could have so easily become if it wasn't for meeting Luke and Obi-Wan. Even after shooting him, you can tell that Han respects Beckett a lot. And Dryden, I honestly don't get how people aren't talking about this guy as a legitimately great villain. What makes him so fun to watch is that I don't think he's faking the niceness. On some level, he actually does care about the people he does business with. He's just also a psycho that flies off the handle at the drop of a hat. And that contrast made for a really good one-off bad guy. Comparing him to someone like Captain Phasma or the generic Empire guys of Rogue One, and there's just no contest. Darth Maul was, well, he was there, which just feels like a strange decision considering that his entire arc on Rebels is already over. I'm not really sure what they could do with him that's both interesting and doesn't violate the continuity of that show. Maybe they'll just throw out his entire arc from the cartoon. Whatever, ultimately that scene just worked to conclude Kira's character arc. And that wasn't bad exactly. I know a lot of people hate Emilia Clarke's acting, but I think she's perfectly fine here. The problem isn't so much in Clarke's acting, it's that her character's motivations just don't quite gel. They keep alluding to how much she's changed and all the things she's had to do to survive, but we don't get any deeper than characters just reminding us of that fact every half hour or so. Her being a secret Darth Maul ally is fun, but there's almost no background for how she got there, so it was kind of hard to connect with. But let's get back to the very first thing I said in this video, the idea that maybe this movie doesn't need to exist. I realize how harsh that sounds, so I should probably explain what I mean. One of the things that I've always liked about Han Solo is that he's just kind of a guy. A cool guy with the confidence and looks of 70s Harrison Ford, sure, but still, just a guy. Unlike Luke, he wasn't preordained to be important. Like, no Force ghosts are ever gonna pop in to chat with Han about his destiny. He was just a scuzzy dude in a bar that found that if he could just find it within himself to stick out his neck for others a little bit, he could be something more than a smuggler. But the effects that prequels have, just intrinsically I think, is that they can't help but mythologize their lead. And I don't really like that. It's okay if Han didn't have an interesting life before his run-in with Luke and Obi-Wan, and if he had just been kind of a small-time, self-aggrandizing smuggler. That's part of what makes his character arc in the original trilogy so good. Go back and rewatch that cantina scene, and pay close attention to Alec Guinness as Obi-Wan in it. He's clearly looking at Han and thinking, yeah, this guy is full of crap, but he's probably the best we're gonna do. The Millennium Falcon in New Hope isn't some legendary ship that he was always destined to have. It was
A piece of junk.
Now those aren't reasons that Han is lame, they're reasons that he's awesome. He's not the important hero destined to win the day from his first appearance. He's the guy off to the side making fun of that very idea, and that's what makes him so beloved.
You're like family to me.
So even though I really liked Solo, a Star Wars story taken on its own terms, I really hope that Disney stops digging up the past and starts leaning into new creations in the Star Wars mythos. It's a big galaxy after all, and there's no need to keep having to tie into the same 3 movies over and over again. Solo may not be taking off like Disney wanted, and that kind of bums me out because I really enjoyed a lot about the film, but hopefully this will make them steer the ship in a more interesting direction. I'm obviously a lifelong Star Wars fan, so digging into a topic like this is a lot of fun, but conveying my thoughts visually can be pretty tricky. I learn a lot through trial and error, but I also really loved this amazing course on producing video essays from Windover Productions over on Skillshare. Skillshare is a massive online learning community with over like 20,000 classes on business, tech, writing, and a lot more. Seriously, browsing through this, it's kind of insane just how many classes you can get with a premium membership. For months now, I've had people ask me for tips on how to create videos in an essay style, and now I have a great course to point them to. How to make an educational video essay. Windover has been making amazing video essays for years now, and anyone looking to make videos on anything from real-world history to Star Wars lore could benefit a ton from listening to them discuss how they approach creating these essays. In many ways, it's a really new format, so learning from some of the very best really does give you a huge advantage. And the best part is, you can get that knowledge completely free for 2 entire months. If you're interested in that course or one of the many other courses on film editing, cinematography, or anything else you feel like learning, go to skl.sh/CaptainMidnight by clicking on it in the video description or pinned comment below. You'll get 2 months of unlimited access to over 20,000 classes for free. So be sure to click on that link and start learning.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.